All right, everybody, we are live for probably, I guess, our jumbo edition of the Game Dev Roundtable this month. We took a month or so off in terms of getting everyone's schedules aligned, but we are back for another about 60-minute discussion on a game design topic. We have a new guest for this month. For longtime fans of Game Wisdom, you may remember that she was, I think, part of like my first or second roundtable back when this was all audio, before there was any kind of weird video stuff. So please welcome to the table Tanya Short from KitFox. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm good. A little bit chaotic, trying to do a lot of things at once, but I'm here for now.
Yep. It's great to have you back. Like I said, Tanya was part of the first one when it was still very much even more chaotic. We used to do like I think a 2 to 2.5 hour one, and trying to wrangle 5, 6 people for 2 hours is an impossible task. But she is joining our panel for this month and hopefully for future ones as well. But I'm going to give everybody a chance to go around and introduce themselves for new people watching. For those of you for the panel, the round is going around would be myself, Tanya, Jack, Ramin, Sharky, and then Tomo. We'll kind of go in that kind of circle there. So I'll start. I'm, of course, Josh Blaser from Game Wisdom, and I talk about game design and industry topics. I am at this point, multi-book author with the Game Design Deep Dive series, with my fourth book, Game Design Deep Dive Horror, now with an actual date of October 8th, which I am very excited about that. Thank you for the silent round of applause there. And that's it for me. So up to Tanya.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Tanya Short. I'm the captain of KitFox Games. We're a small indie studio in Montreal. What I'm most focused on right now is Boyfriend Dungeon. I'm the designer, writer, producer, logistics person on that. And it's been really fun to design for a few years now. But we also published Dwarf Fortress and Paparazzi. And we've also developed games in the past like Moon Hunters and Lucifer Within Us. So lots of fun stuff. But I'm primarily a designer and lots of other things.
Nice. And to Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Mamias, 25-year veteran of the industry, most of it in AAA at Activision, Crytek, Check Six Games, Midway Games. Now I've got my own company with some friends called Impeller Studios, and our game that we've been working on for years is getting ready to come out on Steam, maybe as early as next week. It's called In the Black.
All right. And Ramin?
Yeah, my name is Ramin Shokrizad. My gamer tag is Susrock. I'm a game neuroeconomist and game ethicist that's been pushing into blockchain design since 2018. Last year, I co-founded Immersely. We're building what I consider the first of a new class of hypersocial games that are designed to uh, allow people to make friends through gaming.
Right. And
I'm Sharky Shark, and also known as Jim Tankersley. I'm the CEO of a very, very small indie studio named Nexus Games that is sadly being renamed at the moment. And we're currently working on a CCG, a grid-based CCG, that is cyberpunk and sci-fi themed, and it's shaping up to be quite a big game.
My name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been mostly a game designer for the last, I think, 24 years, because now I remember when Jack says 25, I just have to subtract one for myself. I'm a co-founder of a small dev studio called Hyperkinetic Studios, and we have one internal game called Epic Tavern that's been in Steam Early Access for probably about as long as, maybe longer than In the Black's been in development. And
I doubt that.
We hope to get out of early access soon, and we'll see how that goes out, how that turns out. We also have a comic book in development based on the stories inside Epic Tavern. And my claim to fame is way back when in 2004, I was the creative director of Spider-Man 2.
Epic Tavern's great.
Yep. and really excited about all the games mentioned here today. But for our topic this month, we are talking about skill curves and how they relate to difficulty. More specifically, how should a game be balanced in terms of moving or guiding a player towards hopefully mastery? And this is something I think is a very interesting topic. I don't know if the panel saw on Twitter about 3 weeks ago, maybe there was this whole debate about having invincibility mode in Psychonauts 2. And this once again brought up the whole difficulty is a part of accessibility. No, you have to get good at games. No, games are for everyone. No, we need to make things super difficult, and the whole roundabout there. And it is, I think, a very interesting topic because I think a lot of people don't quite understand, I think, the role difficulty, or more importantly, progression, has in terms of game design. So, I guess the first question to go around, anyone can start this off, is how do you approach the topic of difficulty with your games? Is it something that you think about? Is it something that you're aware of when you're trying to balance or how people experience your games? Oh, I think you're muted. Oh.
I can jump in with an actually pretty clear example with Boyfriend Dungeon, actually, because it has a very specific intended user experience that isn't about mastery. I think it's actually very important, the thing you mentioned about mastery, because a lot of times that is the purpose of difficulty, is to make the player feel or legitimately help them gain a sense of mastery and build their skills that this particular game requires, whether that's reaction times or combos or responsiveness or resource management. There's some factor of mastery there, and that's why most people get a frisson, a satisfaction out of the increasing difficulty and overcoming that just hard enough challenge. But Boyfriend Dungeon is a good example of a game where I think we're going to get a lot of players who have never played a roguelike before. This is their first action combat game, or maybe first in a long time. That's not their favorite genre. They're just sort of dipping their toes in it for the boyfriends, or the girlfriends, or the NB friends, or out of curiosity. And so we definitely balanced it more towards novelty and exploration rather than mastery. And what that ends up getting us is people who are mastery focused feel a little bit dissatisfied. They get to the end of the game and they're kind of like, I only had to try the boss twice. Why I wanted to lose to the boss many times, because then I'd feel more satisfaction. And so we're probably going to have to look into, I highly anticipate that we're going to have to look into having a super challenge side boss super mode. I mean, I feel like that's why Final Fantasy often has these little side bosses, because then those mastery people can go challenge themselves, and we don't have that right now.
So I can jump in. I think of difficulty and as kind of think of it as a pump of some sort, right? That accomplishment drives you forward in the loop, but the reward sort of has to then feed back in and come back around. And so that I think a lot of people that complain about difficulty are actually complaining about satisfaction. And you can achieve that satisfaction in a wide range of ways. Now, granted, if I'm extremely fixated on difficulty because I only played games in the early 80s or something, then that's my thing, and that's what I need. I'll need to find someone who's willing to build a machine that creates that difficulty for me. But I think the broadest segments of the audience are just if I had a good time, then great. And you can easily make it too hard for them. I think in my context, I go with keeping things as easy as possible for as long as possible, though. So I'm building the system to attract player motivation or attract the decision making or pull them down the path. And then only once I've kind of played that out or gotten the system as kind of positively focused as I can make it, then start turning up the difficulty until we find maybe a right relationship between that difficulty and the attraction to go forward.
I think it's difficult if you have a game that's supposed to have any tension. I mean, I think that's where some people have legitimate complaints about something like Boyfriend, and you're like, oh, I went into the boss fight with all these expectations because they have years and years of built up expectations and literacy in these systems. Like they've literally trained their whole lives for this moment. Like they've gained all the skills of reading the HP meters and the mana meters and the attack names and the iframes, you know, like they know the windups and the cooldowns, and like when none of that really matters, I can understand why it's sort of a letdown. That like, well, I was expecting, you know, to be tested, and in the end, I just, you know, pressed some buttons and saw the cutscene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, though, right? If you have choices that you can make and they don't end up having the impact that you expected, then you kind of did that thinking for nothing to some extent. Sorry, Jack, go ahead.
No, great points. And the way I look at it is, on one hand, artistic integrity. When you're making a game, I feel that it's a game and it needs to be beaten, right? That you need to win the game. So for me, I mean, starting at the very beginning, my games, I made them hard. I mean, I made the MechWarrior 2 games. I made, some of them were so hard that, you know, there were many people bitching about them, but we still did it because when you beat the game, it felt great, because some people couldn't beat the game, and there's going to be victims. Now, the other side is, you know, monetary success and critical success that you want. That if you're seeking that, you've got to make it playable by everybody. And I guess the article argues it has to be winnable by everybody. So you just got to, you know, but then is it a game, right? Is it not just, you know, a slightly better than an interactive movie, or, you know, a choose your own adventure if there's no challenge in it whatsoever? For me, that breaks the art form. Right. I mean, when I look at it as a game designer and as a professor of game design, which are my two roles, I see that maybe everybody can't beat that game. You know, when somebody builds a jigsaw puzzle, they can't always beat the jigsaw puzzle. They can't always put it together. When somebody does, you know, any kind of sport or any kind of activity where there's a victory condition, there needs to be the chance of there not being a victory condition. So yeah, you know, you definitely, they paid their $60. They want to see the whole game. Okay, great. Go watch a YouTube walkthrough video of the game, and it's free. You don't even have to pay the $60. So why are you even playing the game? So whereas I should be on the hand of monetary success, I know that's where we're supposed to be. I'm on the hand of artistic integrity, that I make a game, and if they can't beat it, then maybe they shouldn't beat it.
So I'm going to challenge that just a little bit. Unless Ramin, I know Ramin and Sharky Shark, you haven't been able to chime in yet, so maybe I'll let you
challenge away.
Arguing, so I can't resist arguing if there's an opportunity.
No,
but maybe
I love
let
debate.
the other two chime in first. I don't know. Okay, well, what I would say is that the artistic integrity of some games, I think, is compromised by difficulty that keeps away people who are enjoying other aspects of it. Like, I guess what I am most bothered by are people, like, for example, the Psychonauts thing you mentioned, Josh, is like, why would it bother me if someone else turns on invincibility mode? Like, I played my game and they played their game, and
well, that's a cheat code.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Like, we've always had cheat codes.
But cheat codes should feel dirty when you put them in.
I disagree.
Okay? I think they should feel dirty. I think when you have to enter them in, you have to feel, oh, I'm cheating. I feel if it becomes too easy, then it's not a cheat code, right? They're not cheating. The idea they're cheating to win, right? Okay, you're cheating to watch the game, but you're not winning the game. And for me, I think you should have to win the game. I disagree with the Microsoft guy or whoever said that.
I think that maybe we're playing different games. Like, I am one of those people that's not very mastery oriented. I gotta admit, like, I don't get that much satisfaction out of completing a difficult challenge by itself. The novelty I'm into. Like, I get very excited about discovering a new type of reactive attack or something like that. But if it's really just like, I need to jump better and I need to have the timing better, I am out. Like, I quit.
Well, that's just a poorly designed game. There needs to be alternate solutions. There always needs to be alternate solutions to winning. It can't be just one thing. There should be, if you're a good designer, then you should put ways in for almost everybody to win. There should be ways to overcome that challenge.
But like the
right?
core argument that like the mastery itself is what makes completing the game meaningful is what I'm challenging, because I think that that's true for some people, and that's true maybe for some kinds of games, especially games that are extremely hyper focused on one particular play experience. But it feels like most of the major games that have been made the last 20, 30 years have sort of tried to straddle this line where like there is the mastery component and there's also a story component, and there's also this exploration component. And if there are other components, if it's not just an arcade shoot 'em up or something like that, why would someone finding meaning in completing the story without challenge? Like, I don't understand why that has any impact on the integrity of anyone else.
Why don't they just watch it on YouTube then?
Because they want to press it themselves.
But they don't want to press it, really. They only want to press it a little bit. They want to hit the skip button.
I think.
Well, I mean,
go ahead, Merman.
The argument of it doesn't affect anyone else. As you know, I only make online massive multiplayer games, and in that type of environment, your difficulty, if you change your difficulty, typically by spending money in a poorly designed game, you can change the difficulty for everyone else in the game at the same time. And so that does have ramifications for everyone's gameplay experience. But I'm a little reluctant to go down that rabbit hole right now because it could end up being a very long conversation. So what I wanted to say is that games used to be much harder, primarily because for technical limitations, it was difficult to save your game. And now, typically, in most games, you can save your game because there's not a technical limitation. That's fairly easy. But as soon as you can save your game and do it over, if you screw up, it's almost a certainty that if you're patient enough, you'll win a game. And I think that you lose something when you have that assured win. In fact, I could get into the neuroscience of how your dopamine levels go down substantially if you know you're going to win. So to combat that, games have recently been introduced where there's intentionally no save. And generally we call these rogue games, going back
survival games.
Yes, I mean, I used to love playing Rogue on in ASCII on the UCLA mainframe until they would kick me off back in the, I guess that would have been 1980s, late 1980s. Yeah, but
Champions of Kren.
Yeah, but I mean now that's become a real thing. And then the thing is, the games are supposed to be so hard that you can't beat them, but generally to help accommodate the players who are not as good maybe at the game initially, when you fail, you go back to the beginning, but with some bonuses that make it a little bit easier every time. So again, if you're patient enough, instead of just reloading from save, you can just keep losing until your bonuses get big enough that the game difficulty is easy enough for you to get to the end. It's just another way of handling the same thing. But
I don't think a Dark Souls guy does that.
I honestly haven't played Dark Souls, so I don't know how much you can save in the game or whether it's a.
You can grind. You can grind your way into it being easier eventually, but it will destroy your soul, literally. But you can grind your way into it, and I've got some games I played that I hated until they became so hard that I couldn't beat them, and then I loved them. A lot of JRPGs would be boring to me until I get to a boss that I can't beat, and then I start to configure the characters and look deeper into trying to beat it. And I got a little farther that time, and then I got hooked on the game. And if I could have just bypassed that, I would have hated that game, and I said I would never play a JRPG again. So for me, being able to beat the game without being able to earn beating the game, that to me defeats the purpose of it being a game. And I respect Tanya. I totally respect you. I totally respect what you're saying.
We can disagree.
Your point. Every one of my bosses at Activision would agree with you. Every one of my bosses ever in the industry would totally agree with you. This is why I'm the bad boy designer, because I make stuff so hard that sometimes it's probably too stupidly hard. Like the game I'm working on now is way too stupidly hard, and it's hard to get people to actually stick in there and play it. So now we're kind of like, okay, how do we dumb this down when we're supposed to have real science? So now we're having to like jump through hoops to make it so the noobs can play it right and get into it, because I definitely don't want to make a game that I can hang my integrity medal on, and say, oh, I made it, and nobody plays it, right? So it's like, oh, I screwed up somewhere, because you want everybody to play it. But I don't think giving them the ability to win it, I don't know if that would make them stay. I think the ability to train them to win it, or I need to do a better job to help them to defeat it along the way. If I'm a good designer, right? I'm going to give them the tools to beat it, and I'm going to give them a way to beat it.
I mean, I think for me at least, like there's so many other things I could do in life if I wanted to do something hard. Like I could learn to speak Mandarin, and like that's really hard, but also like valuable as a skill. Or like I could learn to play cello. I gave up on it some years ago, and I always regretted it. And I think that's part of the trick is like games are supposed to be hard, but in a immediately rewarding way when it works for mastery people, right? Like you get more joy and more pleasure per second than you could from a real skill, but like this fake skill is like more fun, and it's more you can do it more.
Is it a fake skill? The League of Legends guy winners make how many millions a year? Those guys?
Sure.
That's not a fake skill.
I think it's
That's
really
a real skill.
important that we make the point that there's too much audience behavior that counters the statement that a game needs to be about mastery and skill expression and winning or losing. That said, there's obviously a significant and major segment of the audience for which that's very important. But the issue I took with what you said was to conflate artistic integrity with difficulty, because I feel that is dramatically off target for me. Like I feel that artistic integrity
I respect that
in
too.
creating an experience is about creating something where a person can interact with it, and as a side effect of their interactions, that what you devised for their path plays out in a satisfying way for them, right? And I mean, if we take a game like Journey, for example, whose skill curve is not at all very high, whose artistic integrity is almost getting to 11 out of 10, right? So we know that those examples are out there. And that's not to say that it doesn't take from skill expression for it to be, it doesn't steal from them to say that there are other ways to do it. But we know that there are other ways to do it. In fact, for some players, you can do it with a slot machine.
Well, that's a good point.
When
I say artistic integrity, I was mostly speaking about with regards to the kind of stuff that I make, I guess, because I don't make casual games at all. I make simulators, and I make hardcore shooters, and I make stuff that's like supposed to be immersive. So for me, that is a different story. I absolutely see what you're saying. I probably should have used another word, basically, than an artistic integrity.
Because the second part that you did was then conflate all things not skill and performance based with financial responsibility. And that I'm sure that doesn't work for me.
Okay, I hear you.
And I mean, for me, it actually literally doesn't work.
Okay, I hear you.
Because I am not doing.
I'm very black and white kind of person, though. For me, as a designer, I've got to look. I know I had to sacrifice my artistic integrity when I worked at places like Activision to subscribe to the things that they thought were going to be market driven and make it work. Whereas after the game shipped, it was actually the stuff that I did that made it sell millions of copies. Does that make sense? Or if I would have done it their way, if I would have done it their way, if I would have done it the way they wanted me to do it, I would have made a game that would have bombed, right? And because it would have been too easy. Where part of the like MechWarrior 2, a lot of it was learning to use the challenge, becoming the mech driver and that fantasy of being the mech driver. And if there was a button that they could just sure, we had cheat codes that were out there and they could do God mode and unlimited ammo and stuff like that. But it is such to play that game and put the cheat code on, the game is not fun, right? The game is not designed to work that way. It's the same with Valheim. I'm playing a lot of Valheim these days, which I really love. And there's cheat codes out there where you can build everything, right? And people have these amazing things that they put on YouTube and stuff of these castles they built, and they go built in cheat mode, and everybody's like, then you suck, right? Because you built it in cheat mode. But they got the full expanse of the game, but they didn't get to like.
I mean, if they enjoyed it, I think that's valid. I think they're playing a different game. They're not playing the same game that you are.
And I feel personally that they've missed something that the designers intended to create in the game, right? Because in that game, you can cheat if you have a friend with another server, because you can take material to another server and teleport around and do stuff like that the game precludes you from doing. It's not really entering cheat codes or anything. But if you, like, for instance, you have to move metal, you can't get through teleporters with heavy metal. You have to move it from one place to another on a ship. We've had the most incredible adventures when we were moving that metal. And if we would have missed that, the game would have been a million times worse than it is. And those are the memorable times we had when those were the things certainly you would have cheated to go through and be able to build your house, right? And it diminished the hell out of the game. When, and we banned it. We started saying you can't do anything that would not happen on the server. And the game lasted longer and it was better. So.
And I think there's three real key points here. There's really 3 points that really define difficulty, I think, and that's skill ceiling, skill floor, and artificial difficulty, which would be through UI design, UX design that is not done properly, tutorials, things like that. And my personal feel of it is that you should absolutely avoid all the artificial difficulty in every way, and you should be actually providing an artificial easy in the fact of how you teach your players how to play your game so that they can play it better than they could had you not done that. It's a way of increasing their skills to help themselves overcome your challenges. And I think that like where you place your skill ceiling and skill floor is variable, but I think that a lower skill floor, at least at the start, is better because even a pro player that hasn't played yet isn't a pro player yet, so they don't get they don't get good right at the start. They have to build their skills. So like if you have a building floor up rather than just all of a sudden, here's the final boss kind of thing right at the beginning, it's not probably a good thing. But you need to have it where I like some challenge, but I think that every game, through the tools that you put in there for the player to use, if they have a long enough attention span, that everyone should be able to beat the game. We don't often see that. Well, I mean, we do see that sometimes, but like,
I still haven't beat God of War 2. I got stuck on the last thing at the end of the game. Zeus, I can't beat it. It's a quick time event. Never been able to beat it. I had to watch the YouTube video, and I feel cheapened because of that. But I deserve to not win that game.
Yeah, and it's definitely harder to do that kind of thing in a reflex-based game. But I don't design reflex-based games. I design thinking-based games. RPGs, CCGs. Anything that's really, more challenging your mind than your reflexes kind of thing. So it's one of those things where I'm trying to give them all the tools they need to be able to think over these challenges, or if they can't think over them, they can just over level or in matchmaking, they get paired against a lesser player kind of thing that's on their skill level, so that they have a proper challenge for their skill level and they're able to overcome. And I think overcoming a challenge is dependent on how good the person is. Because, like, I think overcoming a massive challenge to somebody with a massive amount of skills feels about the same as overcoming a minor challenge with somebody with minor level skills. So, like, I think that overcoming challenge is really based off of the player itself, which there's many players of many different skill levels, and there's no true way to adapt that. But, having alternate systems, where you can level up, having, where you can, like in a rogue, where you can get, lose and you can get more stuff and all this other stuff are ways to, tools that we give players in order that they can get to that proper skill level that, both that matches theirs so they can overcome it and then they feel good. But that doesn't mean that the challenge itself has to be the highest possible. It needs to as closely correspond to the player as we can get it, kind of thing. And that kind of thing is insanely difficult.
Yes, it is. And it's one of the things about why people talk about dynamic difficulty. And it is incredibly hard to get something to feel dynamic, that the player feels like they're always, maybe one step below what the game is expecting them. And, I've been listening to Tanya, Jack, and Tomo, and I've been, like, holding my tongue as hard as I can, because there's a lot that I want to respond to. And the first thing is, this came up in the chat from Metadepth, and they talked about the different psychological motivators and mastery motivations for playing a game. And one point that they said was there's also a negative social motivation of feeling pleasure in seeing other people not able or willing to complete those challenges. And that's where we get into the ever popular get good crowd, where you didn't beat Dark Souls without you didn't do it soul level 50 without summons and without upgrading your weapons, and you didn't beat the game. And I think that goes way too far in terms of difficulty. And, like, my own thoughts on this have really, I think, seesawed or kind of gone back and forth between Tanya and Jack over, like, the last few years. And it's interesting because I think, like Jack, like, I've tried to take, like, a very analytical look at game design. And, like, to me, I am 100% on the mastery when it comes to, why I play a video game. And I think to a point Tomo made earlier about this idea that if the game presents you these tools or these options and they don't go anywhere, like if you give me all this crazy movement tech in a 2D or 3D platformer and none of that is, used, referenced, or even required, it does feel like something is not right there. As a good case in point, we can look about the Mario platforming design versus what I see from a lot of other indie platformers. That Nintendo's design when it comes to platforming really accommodates all these different moves, whether explicitly saying you must do the triple jump into a slide jump into a bounce jump, or implicitly by the fact that the level design can reward somebody, not require it, but you can reward somebody by, skipping a section or getting through it quicker because you were better at it. Whereas a lot of indie platformers, the tech never really goes anywhere. It's never really used, and it does feel like I'm missing a part of it. And I think what Shark said was also important about understanding what makes the difficulty of your game, because artificial difficulty, to my mind, that's bad. Like, making a game that you can't read the UI or follow what's going on, that's not making it interesting. It's just making it frustrating to play. And I've seen a lot of indie developers make that mistake, that we're going to make this UI completely confusing, windows that don't mean anything, or
they don't do it on purpose.
I know they don't
Nobody does that on purpose. They're just bad at it.
Yeah,
I'm bad at UI design too, so I easily do bad UI choices when I'm designing.
Yeah.
You don't do it on
Coney
purpose.
Island might be an exception.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is, but
I think some of them actually do it bad on purpose, but those
like the rage games,
not the most.
I don't.
Yeah, rage games.
Yeah. Oh, one second, let me just close my door.
Never
getting
heard of
over it.
But
Well, but getting over it doesn't use the UI to do it, right? Getting over it uses the
Yeah.
opacity of the control experience.
yeah,
Yeah, but the
I
games
think
that
we're
are
talking
based
about
off of
well
it.
designed. We're talking about well-designed games that they want to play.
Mhm.
They just can't. I mean, presumably the UI and everything is fine on Psychonauts 2 or whatever it is, and they can get through it. And they just want to see the rest of the story, but it gets too hard. So that says that UI is fine and the game is fun and the core loop is good and the narrative is interesting
Maybe.
enough that they want to see the end of it, right?
and-
Maybe because
I mean,
they may not.
for me, most game stories are not good anyway. So I don't know why you'd fight to see the end of it if you wasn't just trying to feel the progression. But you know, I mean, I guess Tim Schafer is one of the exceptions.
There is the case of where the tutorials and stuff do not teach you the advanced moves, and they just teach you the basics, and then they expect you to somehow learn those advanced moves on their own, and you're unable to get past a certain point because the game didn't actually teach you.
and
Every game now. That's every game. Everybody has to go to YouTube to learn. There's no more game manuals. Mostly, people go to YouTube to learn how to master games.
And-
that I see.
and that's where
Yeah,
the
that's
idea.
a
Actually,
game
no
manual.
game manuals anymore. It's so weird.
There's people don't read game manuals. You know,
What do you mean? They don't even exist.
I know they don't.
No,
I
we,
miss.
we made one for In the Black just because we're making like an old school space
Oh,
sim.
epic.
We
Very
made
nice.
we made a 230-page game manual.
Nice.
So,
And-
But I mean, I gotta say, as a publisher of Dwarf Fortress, I'm highly aware of how contextual a lot of this is. Like, I do think that there's a temptation to say, like, oh, if it's more difficult and there's not as much compromise for different difficulties, like, oh, that must mean it's casual or it's hardcore, and like these are completely different audiences. But like, Dwarf Fortress is a really great example of something that's like impossible. Like, it's just genuinely impossible. But
awesome. Now I want to play it.
but
You'll have
it's
to take a look.
impossible because the more you play, the more you can choose to make it harder on yourself. And like that initial period, which the developer Tarn and Zach, they're trying to, we're adding graphics to it and putting it on Steam and making it much more accessible so people can actually understand. Previously, it was all in ASCII, right? So it was like not only very difficult, but also it was artificial in that it was difficult to understand what was going on. Is that an ogre or is it a tree stump? You know, like you're not sure.
That's a gross tree stump.
Yeah.
But you know, is it moving? You have to watch very carefully.
Looks cool.
But now it's this interesting thing because a lot of people did choose to just watch it on YouTube. And like in some ways it might be more watched on YouTube than actually played at this point. And like I don't think those people count as having played the game, but that game did still give them something. And now when we're coming out on Steam, I do think that they'll be able to dip their toes a little bit more. And I guess that's what I think is the coolest dynamic difficulty is when you have, but it's not applicable to all game types. And I don't think it's applicable to game types with like narrative, for example, that sort of need you to go from point A to point B to point C. But if you have this simulation where like you can choose at any moment to make it harder, then it becomes much more like a sport or a language or a musical instrument or something where it's like, okay, I figured this out. Now I'm ready for power chords, or I guess that's the easy part. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and like that was what Hades did really well with allowing you to adjust the difficulty as you see fit.
Exactly. I mean, and I mean, they started doing that with even Bastion, right? Like Supergiant has had this really great history of letting people make it slightly easier, slightly harder for themselves as they go. And people still consider their games extremely hardcore, even though they're extremely mainstream accessible also.
Yeah, and like
I'm not opposed to that at all. I'm not opposed to difficulty levels in games, right? And I like it, you know, when the games even says this is a little hard for you, maybe you need to try a lower difficulty level.
And for
because
me,
you're definitely like, okay, maybe I'm not feeling it the way I should feel, but you're making that decision. So I'm fine with that.
and like for me, I just go straight to the hardest difficulty, as Shark knows, when I play on stream.
Except for when you don't, and then chat and I write about it. Like, why are you on the next to hardest difficulty? You need to be on the hardest.
And
I think bringing up Dwarf Fortress is a really good sort of sidestep here because like it's in this category of games which appear extraordinarily difficult actually, because for the vast majority of players, if they're not willing to put, like, in the case of Dwarf Fortress, I'd say it was probably about 25 hours before I felt like I was making sense of what I was doing. And that's not for everybody.
Yeah,
I
and
wanna
like
play this.
Many people, right? And this is the same kind of game that I put into the category of like Crusader Kings series, Hearts of Iron series, maybe to a lesser extent things like Stellaris. But this kind of like, you take a game like Civilization and you just make it way more complicated, which, by the way, Six Ages and King of Dragon Pass are also in this category as well.
oh yes, and
And I think for those kinds of games, there's a purely conceptual difficulty. There's basically a degree of complexity that's going to take you a certain amount of time to understand. And how does that connect to, there's this reflex challenge that you're going to have to try 200 times to overcome.
And like, I think what's also interesting about almost all of those games you named, except Civilization, interestingly, is that there is no win condition. Or actually, also King of Dragon Pass and Six Ages, also they have a win condition. But it's very, very common in all of these games to pick your own goal for like what counts as beating Dwarf Fortress. Like nothing. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as winning Dwarf Fortress. Losing is fun is like the tagline, but it's because you can simulate your fortress for 1,000 years if you want to, and they're not going to stop you. And like, does that make it less of a game? No. But like when people say that a game has to be a certain difficulty to win, like winning itself feels artificial to some degree in some genres.
And there's 2 points I want to make. I know Jack has to leave in a few minutes. I want to see how far we can push things, but there's one question I want to ask everybody about, and then I want to get to this comment by Caesar. But this is the thing that I want to bring up, especially about this discussion on skill curves and how they motivate somebody. And it has to do with Celeste. Now, Celeste is a very celebrated game. It is both a brutally difficult platformer, almost Kaiser-like. It's also a very emotionally driven, story-based game. It's a title that it got a lot of credit and it got a lot of notoriety for its assist mode. The idea that, as we were saying like earlier, that you can literally turn on the cheat menu at will. The game will not reward you, it will not punish you. If you want to make this game infinite jumps, infinite damage, whatever, you can do that. But when I look at the completion rates for this game, I've been doing this a lot on a new show on Game Wisdom, Celeste has higher churn in terms of player interest and player engagement compared to Dark Souls. And Dark Souls, as we know, is not the most approachable game. It is it's not only its complete opposite of Celeste, but it definitely occupies the other end of the spectrum. And I think what I want to ask the chat about, I think this kind of gets to somewhat of a point of what Jack was saying, that if everything is balanced, if this is a perfectly balanced game, and the UI is on point, the gameplay is on point, moment to moment, etc., it's going to, I think, do more to keep somebody invested, as opposed to a game that just says, literally, if you get stuck, here's infinite jumps, here's, 100% you will never take any damage. You can close your eyes and push forward, and you can beat this game if you want to see the story. But it did not seem to motivate the player base to get as far into it as the same people or the same audience of Dark Souls who pushed further despite not having all these additional options. And I want to kind of get thoughts from the table on that point.
We should let Jack go first.
I don't want to go first on this one.
I think I actually think this is a really good example of exactly what Jack was talking about. Is like, this game is mastery oriented. Like, that was the number one talking point that everyone was discussing. That is a mastery based platformer. And I do think that and maybe half of this is my marketing, product design, business person talking, but like that target demographic does not want to be able to skip things. Just like Jack was saying, like that's a particular type of person that is insulted by the idea and like demotivated by making things easier. I mean, unless it's like a whole mode shift or something like that, but like specifically putting on cheats and things. I'm sure it was appreciated and celebrated for it, but I'm not surprised that then that specific demographic changed it. Now, if we were looking at something like Firewatch or something like that, and they added something that made it even. I don't know how you would make that game easier, but let's pretend that there was a cheat mode to make it easier. It always put an arrow to show you where to go. I bet it wouldn't affect their completion rate that much because that was marketed at a different demographic. But I don't know.
Good point.
I think I have an issue with Celeste's design as a whole. Like, I feel like it goes too far towards Kaizo, but like,
I don't even know what most of these words are.
I feel like the just cheat mode is doesn't help it. I think it only does a disservice because I think that you need more stuff in game to make it accessible rather than just give up and put cheat modes on. I just feel like that just feels like it's tacked on rather than part of a good game.
I think it's not as flattering as something like Dark Souls. Like Dark Souls is a really interesting comparison in that it never makes you feel bad for making it easier, or like it never insults your mastery because you made it easier. Like there's this implied feeling, even though Celeste doesn't insult you either. Don't get me wrong. It's not like calling you names because you enabled something. Quite the opposite. But your sense of who you are, your identity as a masterful gamer is like not challenged by the fact that your stats are going up in Dark Souls. And maybe it should. I mean, maybe it's just all numbers in a spreadsheet somewhere. But like for the player experience and people who identify as wanting a masterful challenge, like they want to be tricked into an easier mode, I think, because it hurts their ego. Like they're being threatened. Like what do you mean I'm not good at this game? Like can't I just make it a little bit easier within the world, like in the game world, in the context? Like maybe if a character in Celeste could like sell you something that would give you something, like that would feel better. I don't know.
Yeah. Something besides just a act on a cheat mode kind of thing. Something actually in the game. You don't have to go into the menu and set the difficulty down to 0 and all this other stuff. It's something in the game that allows you to adapt to the situation. But with the way they designed it, more Kaizo like, I don't know if there's anything to do there, but that's the reason why I have a problem with that design itself.
What did you say, Tomo? You kind of said the same time as Shar. I didn't quite hear you.
No, it's just the same. It's just the same thing, basically. But this idea that if you wrap the advantages into the narrative of the experience, then you don't have to feel like it's a cheat code. You can feel like it's a valid part of the game, and you're taking that path. And then if we're still worried about kind of like creating the pure mastery experience, you simply have not doing it that way come with some additional benefit, or really just an extra pat on the back, and you're probably good.
And I'll say, like, I actually added an easier mode in the menus of Boyfriend Dungeon. And like, I feel like it actually would have been better to have it in the game maybe, but it was better that than nothing for people, especially because Boyfriend Dungeon explicitly has this whole dating section that like, maybe you really didn't want to play the dungeons at all. But yeah, it's weird to think. We had one system element that we wrapped in a character moment because it was a weird system situation where we wanted to cap a resource based on progression of this other thing. And we were like, oh, but it's so arbitrary. What do we do? And we were like, what would Zelda do? And it's like, oh, okay, we'll have a character give you a special object that has this arbitrary thing that happens. And like, that made it okay. And suddenly the game was way better. Yeah, it's amazing the power of in-character. I don't know.
In-game, like and
Tanya, your
wrapping it into the narrative of the game is essential. It makes it. There's no downside ever.
Yeah, and like that again is what like Supergiant and Hades does so well, that everything is integrated into. Like, it makes sense that you can make the game easier. You're a demigod. You can turn on God mode. Your father is Hades. You can make it harder with a pack of punishment. And the game will reward you or adjust accordingly. And we are about like 54 minutes, and I know we said about an hour, so I'm trying to speed through this. And one point that Cesar, I hope I didn't butcher that too badly in chat, brought up that I think is very important is that with the game Slipways, that when you make it harder, the hardcore players are performing worse than casual players because the difficulty in that game affects how much the money and that kind of system affects how you play it. And I think this goes back to something what Jack said, and we talked about earlier, that if your game is not balanced right, like if you're not really keeping an eye on what your skill curve, your skill floor, and skill ceiling are, the difficulty settings can feel imbalanced, either making the game just feel completely unfun or frustrating to play on the higher difficulties, or that point about that just feels like you're going through the motions on the easier ones. And it's why I think this is why I always say that difficulty is hard to do right. Because if you make it too hard, you're churning a lot of people that way. If you make it too easy, people are just going to go, okay, so I just, hold forward and close my eyes and I'm done with this game,
Well, that's why you got to do the Geneva Chin flow zone, right? Anxiety versus boredom. And that generally
But
works.
like Hades doesn't have difficulty modes per se, right? Like
It's
they
more
have a
modifiers.
customizable. What kind of difficulty do I feel like today? Kind of
They have magic.
sushi experience.
Yeah.
That sounds like good design. So they designed a way for the players to beat it in game. That I'm a big fan of. Right?
And they wrapped it
think,
in the world and the characters as well.
If it's integrated into the experience and it's contextual and it works, that is only going to enhance the game for me, and that's fine. And I mean, I in Crisis, I had a lot of ways you could beat that game really easy if you did not try to go into full combat. You could stealth through a lot of the combat, and some people liked it and some people didn't, but it was just an option for people if they didn't want to do that. In Battlefield, when you're playing, you can be a medic and not really be in combat, and you're still kind of winning the game by being a medic and not doing the super hard stuff. You're just curing people on the battlefield. And that makes that game a lot easier for people to win at, as opposed to frontline units that are grunts that are, slogging it out with their guns. So if it's integrated to the game, I have no problem with it being as easy as the designers want to. But like I said, when I brought it back to artistic integrity, you as a game designer, you're putting a challenge in front of somebody that you want them to win. If you look at it at the very barest state, I mean, I know Journey is another thing that you would talk about. Not Journey the game, but the journey, the quality of a journey through it, rather than just journey before destination, right? If that's what you want to do, if you're still putting them a challenge for them that you want them to win. That's the way I look at it as a game designer. Because when they beat my game, I roll the credits, right? So they get to look at it and they get to see that they beat the game, and that is in a way is the reward that they got for beating the game, because they're seeing the end of the game. And those that earn that, when they get to those credits, that is an experience that you don't get in other media, right? If I play the easy mode and I go through and I hit the credits, I might look at the credits because I'm okay. The art was good or the story was kind of okay. So get through all the gameplay stuff because I don't care about that. Blah blah blah. Oh, there's the narrative. There's the voice actors who did that. Cool, right? But they don't get that feeling. I don't. At least speaking personally, when I win a game, if I get the credits and it was a great game that was hard to beat, I'm crying. The game is so good, as opposed to if I just hit a button. I probably would have cried at the end of God of War 2 if I could have beat Zeus, but I didn't. I had to go watch it in a video, and it wasn't the same, right? It was a letdown for me. But I still feel that game was great because that was hard, even though it was kind of a cheap ending. It was a bad, turn-based, not what do they call it, quick time event, which I hate. It's terrible game design.
And
I do want to point out one thing with Tanya. She has a very unique challenge with the difficulty of her game because she has two different genres in her game. So like there's almost like two different separate difficulties there. And depending on why the consumers bought her game, they may want to make one part easier and one part harder, and or vice versa. depending on who she sold it to, and that's one of the big challenges about dual genre games, and why, a lot of the people that we teach here, more, beginners kind of thing, they need to stay away from dual genre games until they get some experience underneath their belts, like Tanya has, because that's very hard.
I think that starts moving the conversation to a place I think is really important before this roundtable ends, in that difficulty is a function of audience, not a function of designer. And so, like, if we want to talk about artistic integrity, it's really just being true to the audience you're going after.
That's true.
And so for this whole,
basis.
like, for me as a gamer, and I am exactly who Jack is talking about, or at least I've spent, at least the first 15 years of my gamerness being that player. And so I need those kinds of games. When I go back to those kinds of games, I'm well versed in that kind of enjoyment. But for many other kinds of games, the whole curve differs. The expectations differ. If a whole large segment of users don't want difficulty, then you're doing a bad job if you give them that kind of difficulty. And if we make the whole conversation difficulty or no, it'll make us think that whatever no is the thing that they want, but it's really that there's difficulty, and then there's probably what
player
happens
agency,
next.
consequences. Like there's a lot of things that
there's this whole color wheel of needs for the player, and serving them is essential. What were you going to say, Tanya?
I was just going to say player agency and consequences are ways that other genres that aren't mastery oriented tend to talk about difficult or challenges. Like, so in narratives, for example, it can still feel dissatisfying if there aren't consequences, if the player doesn't feel recognized, and it does feel like it shares a little bit of a design vocabulary with difficulty design and mastery design, but it is a different experience you're offering.
Yep.
And so, it is about, like, who are you talking to? Who are you? What conversation is this game having, and what is it building on or building away from? Like we are, since half of our game is roguelite, we do sort of assume some things about what players will understand, but for players that didn't, hopefully they can catch up very quickly. But that's the trick.
That's a good point, and certainly. It's the artist and the author who has that decision and what they're making themselves happy with, and that, as far as I'm concerned, if the game designer, they want to make their game easy and they want people to play through it and they want people to see the story, then they've done a great job. I have no problem with that whatsoever, because that's what they set out to do. That's what they wanted to do. But if they're building a game and they've got pressure on them, that they want somebody that's telling them, I need you to make this applicable to a mass market, I feel that is violating your integrity, basically.
I mean, that could be a whole other 3-hour discussion, because I feel like my like I had to adjust my Boyfriend Dungeon to survive on Steam without being harassed by people, but we can talk about that a whole other
that's another. And like, again, like we're like right at time. There's still so much I want to bring up, but like,
sorry, I didn't have a lot of time tonight. It's been rough for me. So it was a great conversation. We could do another 2-hour one.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that I think there's a science here regarding difficulty. It involves neuroscience. It involves mathematics. It involves understanding the perils of the win-loss binary, which we seem to be focusing on here. So we're accepting those perils without even considering them. So I think there's a lot of things I'd love to discuss here, but there's not time. So
well, I can go and you guys can continue. I just got to run. I got to run. But you guys
I have to go too.
Yeah, we try to keep this. Again,
I'll tune in. I'll tune in on my car.
Maybe we can do a part 2 to this.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I'm more autistic than artistic, so I have a difficulty engaging my peers here in an artistic discussion, because I see this as, for me, it's more of a mathematical or scientific problem, not an artistic problem. But I think my peers would disagree. So it's hard to have that discussion.
I like that discussion.
I I think it'd be very interesting. I do suspect we'll disagree about a few things, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, we can certainly do a part 2 for this for next month if the roundtable is fine. Because again, like with 6 people, like there's a lot we can certainly draw upon. And like I guess here's my final point. I was going to bring, and one thing that we didn't touch on that I think is important that if we do a part 2, I would like to start with it, is the topic of accessibility and how this applies to the skill curve, I mean to the intended audience of it. But like for my point of view, like it's that here's where I get kind of a bit of hypocrisy or contradiction. Like I say that I'm all for mastery and trying to figure it out, but there are genres that I cannot figure out, whether it's due to the UI or how they're presented, like grand strategy games. I tried to play Total War 3 Kingdoms. I spent about an hour looking at that, and my eyes just started to like roll into the back of my head. I'm like, this is not. It's not getting in here. Let me go play something casual like Bloodborne or Dark Souls after that.
Casual.
Yeah.
Total War is a good game.
But I think this kind of like brings into the various points that Tanya, Jack, and Tomo have made. That you have to look at what the audience is kind of expecting from it, and especially where the difficulty is. Because it's very easy to turn off or turn on all the difficulty of a game, but does that make it a good experience? Does that make it something that somebody will want to play? And I think what Tomo has said about kind of, acknowledging the player, like having these elements in there that the player can feel like, yes, it's a double, quadruple, whatever kind of super jump. Let me do that, and oh my god, I can skip this entire level. It's amazing. Versus, okay, here's all these mechanics. None of them really matter. Like, there's no mastery, there's no even acknowledgement of it. And it really does, I think, at the end of the day, come back to, I think, that kind of understanding of design that Jack talked about. That you have to understand, how all these elements and systems work in order to make this game feel right. Because I think an imbalanced game is just a bad title, or there's issues with it, that having difficulty settings, having assist modes, or whatever, they're not going to fix it. They're more or less just a band-aid over the fact that somewhere these systems broke down. And when they break down, I think people can feel it. And it's one of the reasons why I typically play games on the higher difficulty settings, because I'm that mastery focus, but also because I am that design focus. Because you can see where those cracks show up when you're playing the game at its absolute highest. Now, does everybody have to do that? No. But if you don't understand, I think, why people don't play a game or why they're finding it difficult, I feel like that comes back to bite you as a designer when you're trying to pitch your next game or you're trying to experiment with some other design. But anyone have anything else to add on that? If not, we can begin our wrap-up.
Thanks for having me. I've got to go.
All right. In that case, very quickly, if anyone has any projects they want to plug, any social media, feel free. So, Tanya, since Sanjay have to go, I'll let you two go first.
I don't know if you've heard of this game called Boyfriend Dungeon, but you should look for it very soon.
All right. To Jack?
So I've just finished I wouldn't say finished, we're at beta, so we're certainly not finished. In the Black Space Combat Simulator, talking about hard difficulty. This is very hard, but fun. That is going to be coming out we're doing a Steam playtest, probably shipping next week. So look for In the Black on Steam.
And Rami?
I'm designing Star Garden. It's a hypersocial MMO that facilitates you getting to know the people in your local neighborhood over time, hoping to reverse some of the damage of the pandemic and social media. But I don't think we're going to be ready until late 23 or early 24. So it's still a ways out here.
I'm working on Neon Continuum It's still fairly early. We do public playtesting in our Discord. It's a CCG that's grid-based, very unique mechanics to it. You know, a lot of people have made references to Go in it. But yeah, it's a very strategy first, monetization, is there, but it's in a way that it's not obtrusive. It's more consumer friendly kind of model.
Someone will find a way to complain about it, I'm sure.
We've already been preparing for it.
we're
Josh
supposed
has
to be
already
making
been
these for
complaining
free,
about it.
right? We're supposed to be making these games for free. That's what they told me.
Yeah.
And Tomo?
So we have a game in Steam Early Access. It's been there for a while. It's called Epic Tavern, and it is a game all about trying to bring the emergent storytelling that people find in some of those games we were talking about that take forever to play and have really complicated systems, and make it more accessible in one way, and also just trying to make possible this idea of having a narrative game that does not go from point A to point B to point C, rather just kind of tumbles down the hill as you influence it.
All right. But, well, we only went about like 10 minutes over, or at least the 60 minutes of our actual live stream, so we're getting better at this. But I will let everybody go. Thank you so much for the panel. Again, Tanya, thank you so much for coming on for this first time. Hope we'll have you back on for next month.
It was fun. We'll see you about next month, but sometime soon.
All right. So
Bye.
All right, I will let, if you guys want to get off, or feel free. So final thing, since they have to go, if you're a fan, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing. We try to do these roundtables at least once a month, depending again on schedules and whatnot. If you have a topic for the roundtable to discuss on a future stream, please let us know. You'll find links to everybody's social media, projects, everything that they've mentioned in the descriptions down below. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.